What they like is full sun when they flower and then cool shade afterwards. So growing under deciduous trees and shrubs, very similar to hellebores. And you get some wonderful fragrances. Can you smell them from there? They, Tomo came over to do some hepatica crosses, and he said about this new hepatica variety which had been found. And I said, oh no. And he said, how did you know? And I said, what? He said it was Yoshi Ono that named it.
Hello and welcome to episode 118 of Talking Dirty. Over at East Ruston Old Vicarage, looking pretty in pink, we have Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and very handsome horticulturalist. Is it pink? Have I done you a disservice?
No, it is pink. It's kind of a dusky dark pink. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of John Smedley's specials. I forgot. We're probably not allowed to advertise, are we really? Anyway, never mind. Sitting on this dull day over in Cambridgeshire is Thordis Maria Sophia Fredrickson, and she brings that inimitable ray of sunshine into our lives every time we do one of these podcasts. How the devil are you?
I'm all the better for sitting down to record this. In a message before we recorded this, Alan said from one joyful person to another. Our last episode was with Mr. Enthusiasm himself, John Massey of Ashwood Nurseries, a Hepatica special, if you haven't caught it. So do go and watch that. And today we welcome back, just so long overdue, one of our Talking Dirty favourites, Val Bourne, award-winning garden writer, all-round wonderful plantswoman. How are you? How have you been?
I have been absolutely blooming. I haven't enjoyed all the winter rain. I got rather fed up. But yesterday,
me both.
it was spring here in Cold Aston. Our cat Frank spent a lot of time rolling around on the paving on his back with his legs in the air. And I felt rather like doing the same because he sat outside and had a cup of tea.
That I would love to see.
Yes, we might see it yet, Alan. So I'm well. I've just finished a book, which is coming out next January. Tough Plants for Tough Places by a Tough Old Bag. No, the last bit was made that up.
Oh, I bet that was fun to put together and well needed.
It was fun to put together, but it was agony writing it, as any book is, because I have a lot of writing anyway to do. So when I'm doing a book, it's just extra.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you, Val, that I feel that you've been popping up all over the place with an article, and I looked at the article, and I then look to see who's written it. Yes. Then I'll tell you whether I'll read it or not. And if it's you, I always do, I have to say.
I've just written a lovely one in English Garden, which is gone now, but I expect it's on the web, about the Snowdrop Man, John Morley.
Yeah.
And I went over to Suffolk to see him, and then a few weeks later, I was up at Harvington Hellebores in Lincolnshire, and that's in this issue. And I'm writing up Geums. I've got Geums next month. I'm lucky that I get plenty of work.
Can I ask you something about Geums, because you're obviously now quite an expert, having done research on it, but there seemed to be a breakthrough about 5 or 6 years ago with a Geum called Totally Tangerine, which kind of lengthened the flowering period. And I gather that there are many more now that have a longer flowering period rather than that just brief spring into summer period.
Well, to be fair, there have always been ones with about 8 to 10 weeks, like Princess Juliana, because they're sterile and they're more double-flowered.
Yeah.
Totally Tangerine wasn't really a breakthrough. It took like 14 years to breed.
Right.
And it was bred at Far Plants near Littlehampton. And
it was a breakthrough for me, I have to say.
Yeah, I know. It's a brilliant plant.
Yeah.
I love it with Amsonia. Absolutely adore it, because it flowers at the same time and you get the slate blue. It is a wonderful plant. I would think it's up there in my top 5 new plants that have popped up over the last 15 years, along with things like Helenium, Sahin's early flower. I think that's another brilliant thing.
With Geums, I remember very early in my gardening life, I haven't grown many Geums since then, actually. I had like when you first discover a plant, I got into gardening however many years ago. And you go to the garden centres and you're like, oh, I've never seen this before. I've never seen this. And you sort of fall in love with each one. So I ended up with several Geums, and my garden was a bit dry for them. And I if it was off the back of talking on the radio to you, it was Geum rivulari, and you said, oh, it like wants to be rivulari, it wants to be in the water, so I put it in the pond, and it did much better in the pond.
Yes, those rivulari types do. I think my favourite rivulari type is actually bellbank, which is a big frilly sort of warm strawberry pink, and that came from Geoffrey Smith's garden, and he found it on an area of the garden called bellbank, and I'm slightly confused because at the time he was curator of Harlow Carr and he planted it there, but I'm pretty sure he found it in his garden and then planted it at Harlow Carr. So I don't know whether the Bellbank name refers to his garden or Harlow Carr, and I expect somebody will let us know if we're.
Please do, yes.
But, it's a fabulous thing. It has nodding flowers and this big frilly pink flower. I'm not fond of all the cocktail series that have been raised in America like Mai Tai, because they don't overwinter here. And I talked to the national collection holder, Sue Martin, who's down in Kent, because we are cold here. And she said exactly the same thing. She couldn't get them through the winter. So I think if you buy one of those big frilly ones and they're all over the garden centres, perhaps treat it as a container plant and take it in winter like you would your agapanthus.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? Because lots of so-called American plants, I'm thinking now Echinacea, the plants from the plains in America.
Yes.
I mean, sometimes we find it difficult to get those through the winter.
Well, they don't even bother to try to get them through the winter. They're sold in America as what are called spot plants, and they're almost treated like a pot plant.
A bedding plant almost.
Yeah, it's a bedding plant. And, I can't get them through here because British winters are so stop-start.
Yes.
And they come into flower, into leaf too early and get clobbered by the weather, and they don't know where they are. So I do love them, but I don't. I tend to grow ones I raise from seed, like Magnus and White Swan.
Yeah.
That they're more sort of enduring here for me.
The garden centres, because they try and woo us, as do the plant breeders and all the rest of it, with these wonderful sunset shades and these glamorous green ones. Yes. And everyone sort of comes along and they think, oh, I must have one of those or two of those or four of those, whatever.
Nobody's got them.
No.
And when they held the trial at RHS Wisley, I wasn't on it, but I said to somebody, well, it won't last very long because they'll all die in winter. But they didn't die.
Oh,
strange. So they did sort of get some sort of trial out of it, but they aren't easy echinaceas.
Can I have my little moment of triumph, which is that I did exactly as Alan said. I mean, how am I, the primary member of the Sunset Shade fan club, going to walk past one of these echinaceas in these glorious sunset shades and not buy it? Which is exactly what I did. I bought one in a garden centre near me. And it's always dangerous, isn't it? You nip in to buy some gardening gloves or, I don't know, a bag of compost or something. And then you come out with all of the plants you weren't supposed to go in there for in the first place. But anyway, that aside, bought this, planted it thinking, I'll never see you again, but I'm going to enjoy you while you last. And about 3 years later, it's still there. It gets better every year.
Yeah.
And of course, because I thought it was going to die, I gave no attention at all to what it was called. So literally no idea what it is, but it is glorious and seemingly
I've got lots of plants like that in my garden that people come here and they say, what's that called? And I say, I've forgotten, or I don't know. Because I do label my snowdrops, as Alan probably knows, I label my snowdrops.
Well, I'd have to just say before you go any further that the snowdrop that you sent me, do you remember?
EA bowls.
Yes, you did, yeah.
Yes.
4 flowers this year.
Fantastic. Yes.
So
I've got a clump. I don't want to depress you. I've got one clump with about 40 flowers on it.
Well, I'll get there, Val.
It's deep. Well, it's deep within a herbaceous plant. Succisella frosted pearls and an echinacea deemed sunflower. So I could never move it. So I just have to leave it there. And it's very happy, forcing its way up through those perennials.
Actually, that must look quite stupendous.
It is. It's lovely. It's going over now. It's just started to go over.
Yeah, I've started moving all mine.
Yes.
Moving and dividing and subdividing and so on and so forth.
Yes.
I eventually want my generous clumps to become drifts.
Yes. Yes.
And that's the only way.
It is actually. I mean, I always envy these people who chip, because they chip and they get 40 bulbs from their chips, and quite
Yeah.
often they're in a big lily pot, and then they sink the lily pot, and you go to their gardens and they're amazing because they've got these big swathes of things. But
Yeah.
I haven't chipped. I don't have time to chip snowdrops.
No, I think this is the thing. I think, you know, if you leave it to the people that can do it. If we
Yes.
do it our way and leave it to the others to do it their way. But you're absolutely right. I think it takes a lot of time, a lot of preparation, and of course you have to be scrupulously clean with
Yeah.
everything
Yes.
when you're doing it.
Bags
Yes.
of fungicide soaked vermiculite and
I know. Well, I've got the vermiculite. I'm not keen on the fungicide, but Allen Street many years ago, the late Allen Street of Avon Bobs, did give me some, and I've never used it. So perhaps one day when I actually do stop writing, I'll have time to chip my snowdrops. Who
You
knows?
will not stop writing because you're too good.
Oh, I don't know about that. I have to stop one day, Alan.
Well, yes, we all will, but you know, that's not soon, Val.
No, probably not. I need money for the snowdrops.
Yeah, well, exactly. Can I ask, before we move into your show and tell, can I ask if there were any you were particularly pleased this year, ones that had come back or ones that had bulked up well, or
I like this one because this is called Marjorie Brown, and I just picked it today because it's still looking fabulous. Most of my snowdrops were early and they went over and they got ravaged by wind and rain. But Marjorie Brown is a lovely one because she's so late, and she's an Elwesii, and if you, I hope you can see the leaf there is quite pale, and when you get one of those paler leaves, they'll take quite a bright position. And this garden is south facing, and there's no water table because we're 700-800 feet above sea level, and we're perishing because it's cold Aston. And these late snowdrops, I've got several of them that carry on into March towards April, and they just keep the show going. And that's Marjorie Brown, and that was spotted by a famous snowdrop expert called Ruby Baker, who's now passed. And she saw it in a flower display in a church near Winchester and commented on it because it was so late. And I don't know whether Marjorie Brown was the person who'd arranged it or what, but it's called Marjorie Brown anyway. And it's very good. It's a very strong one.
yeah, lovely, robust looking flower as well.
Yeah, it is. Jaunty.
Yes.
And a good picker, obviously, too.
Yes. Yeah, I never pick them.
No, I don't.
I picked that one just for today. But you know, I didn't like doing it.
No,
I'm good at picking flowers. I've got a cutting garden, and I go down there and it's got phloxes and roses and peonies in it. And it's a special area for cutting. I go down there with the secateurs and I get there and I go, no, I feel like I'm cutting a baby's head off. So I just leave it there. So I'm not good at cutting flowers.
You know, Val, you make me feel so much better because that was the whole point of the allotment. I hate cutting things from my garden because it's very small and I can see all of it from my window. So I feel like, oh, if I cut some of this, it's just I'm going to spoil the balance. It looks perfect as it is, spoil the picture. So I'll have an allotment. And I had all my dahlias and things, and I did cut and have my posies in the house. But each time I cut a bloom, it took me almost as much time to decide what to cut at the allotment. Because when I would come through the gate, I'd look over and see all these mounds of dahlias. I don't want to destroy the illusion.
No, I do cut dahlias because the more you cut, the more you get. So I do cut dahlias, but I don't cut very many other things.
Well, you make me feel better because I have similar feelings when I go to cut things. Now, we've had a little bit of your show and tell, and as soon as I saw you'd cut a snowdrop, I had immense waves of gratitude because I know that you particularly hate to cut snowdrops, so thank you. What would you like to show us next?
Well, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned my garden is south facing, and I only have 1/3 of an acre, so I really hate Mr. Gray with his 32 acres. It just does not seem fair that I only have an allotment and 1/3 of an acre. But the big problem here, because we are high and we face due south, is that everything bakes up. It really scorches. And there's no clay content in the soil here. It's deep soil. It's not Cotswold brash, but it doesn't hold nutrients very well and it doesn't hold moisture very well. So we're quite free draining. So when I moved here 18 years ago, with my love of things like ferns and trilliums, I had to cast the shade. And I've got 13 witch hazels, lucky for some, I think one of them's died, actually. It must know it's the 13th. And they've all been fantastic. But the other thing is, I love cherry blossom. And we've had such a miserable wet year that the bees have really struggled to get out. And when they have, all the crocuses and aconites have been mushy and they haven't been able to access them. So the cherry blossom has been really, really important. And this isn't a very good branch of Prunus mume, the Japanese apricot, Bene Shidori.
Oh, yeah.
And I had to get it because this is quite a tall tree. It goes up to about 4 meters. And it's one of the things that is absolutely sensational here from late February onwards, when you get these, well, they're like a very strident pink. I can't even describe that colour.
Shrieking chaparelli pink. Shrieking chaparelli pink.
Yeah, something like that. It's wonderful. It's a sort of nail varnish I would wear if I didn't have completely filthy nails that are cut down quick by gardening. But it's a lovely thing, and it's Bene Shidori, which means the flight of the red plovers in Japan.
I never knew that.
No, it's beautiful. And it's a beautiful thing. And it's sort of, you see it against even a grey sky.
Yeah.
And this is a new branch, so there isn't very much blossom on it. But further up, where the tree is more mature, you get lots of blossom on one branch, and it's absolutely beautiful.
Actually, the other thing I've seen that used as a wall-trained shrub, and
yes,
it looked remarkable because the sheer flower power on those branches was such that, you know, it's just a naked framework. All you've got is those shrieking chaparelli pink blossoms. Yes. And it looked absolutely splendid.
Yes, I know. When I went to plant it here, I bought it from a garden sale at a friend's house who's a very keen gardener. And she said, don't buy that. It'll never grow in cold Aston. Well, that's just like a red rag to a bull. Somebody's saying, don't do this. So I did buy it, and it was grafted quite badly at the top. It had been grafted on another cherry, obviously, and the graft wasn't brilliant. And I put it over by the wall, close to some trees. And for a while it did nothing, because all these blossom trees need a bright light to produce the flower bud. But now it's up to about 5 meters, and it's fantastic. You know, it's just a lovely blossom. And then shortly afterwards, now this is cursor, and I'm afraid a lot of the blossom got blown off. So if you imagine this with about 3 times as much blossom, and what happens when the tree is on, the blossom is downward facing. And that's quite important in a year like this year, because actually the blossom petals act almost as an umbrella and they shed the rain. And cursor arrived in about 1940 something, and it was one of Cherry Collingwood's cherries that he bred, and he called it cursor because it was he thought it was a hybrid of Prunus sargentii, which is the sar bit, and another Prunus which I think was Curilensis, but I probably got that wrong. But the KUR was the other species, so he called it cursor. But actually I think people have found out through DNA that it isn't actually that cross, but it is most wonderful small cherry, gets up to about 5 meters. Mine's been in about 17 years and it's about 4 meters. And as the blossom comes out, just after that, the coppery leaves come out. And it's just the most wonderful small tree with these downward facing pink blossoms. And he also bred this one called Okami, and it looks incredibly similar when you sort of look at the blossom. But if you look at the way it's held, this is more outward facing, and this is a more shrubby thing, Okami. And it was another one that he named and bred in the 1940s. And Cherry Collingwood Ingram, I hope I've got his name right. I may have messed it up a bit.
No, you haven't.
Cherry Ingram,
Yes.
I would call him. He was the most amazing man.
His correct name, I think, was Collingwood Ingram.
Yes, and they called him
They called him Cherry because he loved cherries and bred cherries.
He was the real cherry expert. And they invited him to go to Japan to lecture about cherries. and he was shown some paintings of some cherries that had been lost in Japan, because the amazing thing is every cherry that's named was collected in the wild. So if you get a cherry like this one, for instance, let me find you, Prunus incisor Kojo no Mai, which is almost a shrub, beautiful thing, just coming out, lovely thing, like confetti in every garden centre. And Prunus incisor Kojo no Mai. And this was found on a path on Mount Fuji. And I've got the name here, if I can actually find it, the Yoshida Path. It was found there, and all the ones in garden centres come from that one particular tree. So these cherries, some of the wild collected ones, are disappearing. So he was shown these paintings by a Japanese cherry expert, and one of the paintings was the thing that translated as the giant white cherry. It was a really big cherry, not suitable for small gardens like mine, Alan, but you could get it. And you probably got it. And he said to the Japanese man, I've seen this cherry in a garden in Sussex, garden called Freeman's. And he said, I've taken cuttings of it because I admired it so much, and I don't know what it is. So he was able to reintroduce Tai Haku into Japan and, you know, reinvigorate it. And I have this amazing book, which is the Manual of Japanese Flowering Cherries, which tells
It's upside down.
Oh,
Thank you.
you know why? Because it's Japanese. The thing is on the back. It's the wrong way around. The cover's on the back. And it's a translation, and it tells you where all these cherries are found. And this is was got for me by a man called Chris Sanders, who's a horticulturalist who worked at Bridgemere. And he's really our modern equivalent of Cherrywood, of Cherry Ingram, rather. You know, he's the cherry expert now, and he was responsible for getting these Matsume cherries, which are a new breed of flowering cherry, into this country. Things like chocolate ice, you know, they're more resistant because these are so many of those old cherries are dying out that they're being replaced by newly bred ones. I think that's my show and tell apart from this one. Now, do you ever go to garden centres and you see something and you think, I want that? And I wanted another Kojo no Mai. And if you look at Kojo no Mai, it's got these divaricate twisted branches, a bit like that twisted hazel. And that means that it slows down the sap. And this cherry produces so much blossom because of that divaricate slowing down of the sap. So I went into this garden centre and I saw this plant, and it was labelled Kojo no Mai, and it had quite straight branches. And I convinced myself that because it was young, it was perfectly right. It had the label on it. So I planted it. And about 5 years later, I've got a 6-metre high tree full of this blossom. But this is such a bee favourite. You know, all these cherries are so good for honeybees, and bees of all sorts are all over them. And because it has such a washout winter, when all those things like crocuses are missing, you know, I really do love my cherry blossom.
I think one of the things about Kojo no Mai is the fact that you go to a garden centre, and depending on how posh the garden centre is, you might see a standard one or two, or you might just see this little plant sitting in probably a 2 or 3 litre pot.
Yes.
No more than, I mean, under 60 centimetres tall, probably. And you think that's a lovely little thing, but it's going to be a little thing forever. So I think people should be aware of the fact that it can become a sizable bush.
There are some at Knight's Hayes Court in Devon, the National Trust Garden, that were planted by the Heathcote Ameries, and they're probably 10 feet, 12 feet high.
Exactly.
And
I know a garden
divaricate branches.
Yeah.
And that is actually where I first saw Kojo no Mai and admired it. And it was had all blue miniature bulbs, Scillas and ascari around it. And it was just so pretty because what makes it so pretty is the pink calyx.
Yes.
That the flowers are in, so it never looks sort of glacial. And I thought, well, I'm going to buy one, but I've seen it so many times in garden centres in the past, and it was full of flower, even though it was that high. And I thought, well, that's been in a tunnel. It'll never do it in the garden. Well, that's complete nonsense. That is one of the very best flowering spring plants for any garden, Kojo no Mai. It's a brilliant thing.
And I never realised, though it makes perfect sense, that part of it is to do with your fancy word, your divaricate.
Yes,
I'd never thought about the slowing of the sap. I mean, yes, makes perfect sense.
well, of course, you do it in roses. You know,
Yeah.
you loop them up like looper caterpillars on pergolas, or you twist them around poles. And that's all to do with slowing the sap down and producing more flower. So I think it's lovely. And my poor cherry blossom, a lot of it is on the ground because we've been so windy here at times. I mean, every time I put the weather forecast on, the man on the weather says, we're having such a mild February. Well, we haven't had a mild February here. We've had days when it's been 3, 4 degrees consistently. I think that's the London weather forecast. And I'm in the cold Cotswolds.
Yeah. Yes, in the brilliantly named Cold Aston. Going back to Knights Hayes, I've been there, and because we always are going for places that are dog friendly. And if you're a very keen gardener who has a dog, unfortunately, quite a lot of places are closed off to you. And Knights Hayes is dog friendly, and I just remember those Scillas, just all of those
the
Scillas.
wooden anemones.
Oh yeah, absolutely glorious. And it's such a, I love that colour. I mean, I don't suppose there's anyone really who doesn't love that strong, beautiful purpley blue. And it's lovely, lovely to see all the Scillas coming out. I'm sure you must have several Scillas in your garden, Val.
I do have lots of different ones, but I think the most useful one of all is Scilla iberica, because it's very good at flowering in shade. Although, having said that, we had such a dry late spring and early summer that there's not that much flower on my Scillas this year, and my daffodils are lacking flower.
Mm.
I think that's purely because we had that dry, very, very dry spell in May, June. They didn't put much back into the bulb.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that this year that won't happen. So I think that's so useful, and I just allow it to self-seed. But there is one that I absolutely don't allow to self-seed, and that's Scilla bifolia, which is the little, almost like lilac-like triangular raceme. And I've got a very early form that's out, and I leave that to self-seed. But that is awful because it has seed pods, and I always call them, I don't know whether I can say this, gonads. You know, they really are horrible. And I take those off, and that is a nuisance. I wish I'd never planted it. But you get things like that, you know.
Yeah, you do. I mean, my Scilla tail on that is Scilla bithynica. And I was at the Cambridge Botanic Garden, and they had, carpets of it. And I said to one of the girls there, you couldn't just dig me up with a little shovelful of that just to take home. I mean, they know that we know each other.
Yes.
So I brought it home and I planted it in the wood, and it gradually carpeted the woodland floor, which I loved.
Yes.
And then we had a Danish lady working in the garden who pulled every single one out because she thought it was a weed. It was just too much of it.
Too much of it.
Yeah.
I don't know why people do that.
It is back, Val, from seeds that she left behind. So
yes. Yes. I had an allium, a little white allium. I think it was so. No, it wasn't. It was try something.
Triquetium.
And Bob said it was a sterile form and it wouldn't self-seed.
Oh, that's a load of Bob.
Pain, absolute pain in the garden. And I can see these leaves coming up now. You know, they're bright green, and every year I try and get it out. So I've got to go and have a little sort of prod about there and try and get rid of.
Do you know about Val? That reminds me of a tale, because I was in a lady's garden the other day. She'd invited me to help myself to some first snowdrops. She said, I was going to leave them to you, but you might as well have them before I peg out. Anyway, I said, what's this little tufty leaf here? And she said, oh, don't. She said, they were somewhere in Europe. And she said, I said to John, stop the car. And I went and picked a little piece, tiny little piece. And I thought, you lie, you probably grabbed a handful. But and now it's all over the garden, look. And it had. So I would just counsel people to be careful when you do pick something.
Things come on in on things, because I know that I bought a hellebore, and when I planted it, it had some Tulipa bakeri in it, which is a tuberous sort of horrible thing, pink and yellow flowers, quite ugly leaves, and that's a real colonizer. And it's so difficult to take things up in certain areas.
Yes.
Because it's all among adiantum, and I just try to sort of keep, pulling the leaves off to try and discourage it, but I think I
Mm.
might just be making it spread even further, thinking, oh, I have to go over there now. I mean,
I need
you
a
make
better spot.
lots of mistakes. But I'd rather have that than a blank garden with big gaps.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
so would I, but I mean, it's
I
just a
think
matter
it
of
helps you.
control.
Yes,
Mm.
yes,
Also, I
definitely.
mean, there will always be plants try, like you say, with the gaps. There'll always be plants trying to colonize the gaps. So as long as you've got things filling the gaps, better to have that as a
Yes.
weed than something else, I suppose.
Well, I've got a lot of wood anemones in the woodland garden, and they're quite late here. They're just about beginning to show now, but they are really good in the damper areas at filling the gaps. And I like to have dense planting in the woodland garden. I like to have dense planting everywhere because it encourages so much activity at soil level. And it locks in carbon, which is really important. And, you know, it's a ground cover, and then you get lots of beetles. And we have lots of beetles here because we're organic. And then they eat the slugs and the slug eggs. So we're very rarely troubled by slugs because we've got this deep canopy over the soil. I mean, I've never used anything like slug pellets.
I'll tell you one thing that I love, and it is an old log pile that I made probably 20 years ago. And it was quite a sizable log pile. And the only way you would know it was a log pile today, Thordis, you've seen this, is the fact that it is moss. It's just pure moss, but they are
Yes.
shaped like logs, if you see what I mean. So it's completely covered, but it's home to goodness knows what. And some lovely self-sown plants. We've got ferns in there. We've got the old carex in there. Japanese anemones have got in there. Don't ask me how, but they have. And it's just a lovely sort of secret, shady nook.
Yes. Well, people have got a real downer on moss, haven't they? They hate it. But
I love
actually,
moss.
it's really full of life.
Yes.
I bought microscopes for my two eldest granddaughters about 10 years ago now, because they're both learning to drive now, those two particular two. And they came over here with their microscopes and they collected some lichen off the stone walls and looked at it. And it was full of little mites running about.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, sustaining the wrens in winter.
And who knew they were there?
Yes, and you couldn't see them with the naked eye, but they were there. So I mean, I don't use any toxins in my garden at all, but I do think people are very neurotic about moss, and perhaps they should, you know, rake it out if it really bothers them, but don't use any toxins on it.
I adore
Well, the
moss.
thing about it is, I mean, everything deserves its place, I think.
Yes,
And you know, if you look at the benefits of moss, it keeps the moisture in as much as anything, doesn't it? Because it's always, if you look underneath a moss, you put your hand on moss, it's always moist, it's damp.
it is, yes. And I have quite a lot of polypodiums, and they tend to
Yeah,
get moss, and it's embedded into the plant, and I just leave it there.
yes. Well, to me, it's part of the
It doesn't
beauty.
do any harm. I mean, that's what happens in the wild.
Yes.
Yes.
Polypodies.
Oh well, I'm whenever we holiday in Somerset, I Peter can never kind of get over how every step of a walk he loses me. I mean, I suppose now with the baby, maybe not quite so much, but formerly I'd just be left behind, looking up and getting close and taking photos of ferns and moss on branches and
Yes.
self-seeded into
Yes.
the walls, and I love it. That whole, I mean, we don't get it here in dry old Cambridge, but there where there's so much moisture and you get all of these wonderful ferns and moss, and it's perfect.
I
I
mean,
love it.
they're temperate rainforests, which are getting really, really rare now. And
Yeah.
they realize they've got to conserve them. And we get lichens in the garden, but we get quite a lot of rain here because we don't get as much as Stroud, which is on the sort of southwest scarp, but we do still get quite a lot of rain in Cold Aston. It's not, I mean, I used to live in Hook Norton on the top of the Cotswolds, the northeastern top, just off. And it used to be in a rain shadow, and often we'd only get 19 or 20 inches, which is probably what you get in East Anglia.
It is, yeah.
Wetter here.
Not this year, Val.
No, you've had it. You've
Yeah.
had times as much, haven't you, in
Yes.
February?
Yeah, we
You've had
have.
more than us, I think.
Mm.
Lots of
Yeah.
moisture at the moment. To go back to your thing about the dry end of spring and the heat last year, you grow, like you mentioned, all of your witch hazels, which may be 12 or 13, depending on whether that 13th one has died, and then your trilliums, all these things that want moisture. How are they faring at the moment? Are they doing all right? Are they benefiting from the recent moisture, or can you notice the kind of after effects of the dry?
Well, I think things like trilliums and erythroniums are really snowmelt plants. And if you have a spring that's quite cold and wet, they do far better because the flowers last longer. We've had, I think, 6 or 7 spring droughts here, and the trilliums are fine. They're in quite a shady, sheltered part of the corner of the garden, in a sort of corner on the, I have to think about this, southeast corner, which I created for trilliums, because we're such a windy garden from the southwest. And, they are doing well and they are setting seed, but they do take ages, trilliums. And I always worry about them, but I won't water the borders in the spring. But what I have got, because I've got quite a lot of rare ferns, I invested in a seep hose, a couple of seep hoses, and I will use those a couple of times when they start to sort of look flaggy. If you look at a witch hazel and the foliage is straight down, vertical, that's telling you that it's trying to avoid transpiration and it's thirsty. So I will put the seep hose on for a few hours late evening, and I will give them a bit of a water because there's an awful lot of value down there. Just the witch hazels, let alone the trillium you've worked to get going. But I don't water anything else apart from my containers and my greenhouses, because I think water is such a precious resource. And there's a whole, London nearly ran out of water in the 2012 Olympics. There's so much water being taken out from the underground aquifers. In Cambridge, they've had 20% more people living there, and it's all been new housing.
I think a lot of them are in Cotton,
all
where
the
I
chalk streams have dried up in Cambridgeshire. The smaller chalk, it's really serious. So I have water butts, and I just let things go. And sometimes in late July, the garden can look really, quite poor.
Think back to Beth Giotto when she carried out her experiment on the ex-car park,
Yes.
White Barn. With the first, I think the first, second, third year,
Yeah.
people were complaining that there's nothing to see. It was dead in the middle of summer.
Yes.
It was dead to a certain degree, but the plants were estivating. They were sitting beneath the soil and they were thinking, well, I can't grow anymore. So let's the top die and we'll hang on to the roots and we'll surface again when we get some moisture.
Yes, and a lot of those plants were Mediterranean, and that would be their natural growth cycle.
Yeah.
They would grow in the warm, wet winters and shut down in the hot, dry summers.
Yeah.
So I think one of the real fallacies of gardening is the all singing, all dancing border that looks good throughout the year. It just cannot be done. In this garden, the spring garden, the erythroniums are going to be out soon. The ferns are going to be breaking. It's going to be fabulous. In a couple of weeks, it's going to look wonderful because there's going to be so much out that's just holding back at the moment.
But you just touched on something, Val, that I think is quite important, and that is you were talking about trilliums and the way they like the shelter and the shade and everything else. And then suddenly at this time of the year, as the sun gets hotter and stronger, you will get that one day when it just gets too much. And the best then will be over of the spring garden, and you can almost see it happen overnight.
No, it always happens here in about the second week of May, first week of May. It's just a tapestry of green because you've deadheaded the hellebores. Probably you've got wood anemone foliage, but no flower. Almost everything will have gone over in that garden, but it will be a green tapestry. And that's equally beautiful in summer to go down there on a hot day. And
I think I'm going to call you Saint Val because you just you just do everything. I can't think of the last time when I deadheaded a hellebore.
Yes, but I've only got a third of an acre.
Yes, that's it.
And I am a meticulous gardener. I spend a lot of time on my hands and knees weeding out things like speedwill by hand. You can't do that with 32 acres.
No, it's also, if you've got a small enough space, I think it's quite therapeutic, that kind of thing. If you've got the time, if you can carve out a little bit of time to do something like that, I find it very therapeutic. The deadheading of hellebores, you might feel some people go, oh, but allow them to self-seed and that's lovely, which
No, it's not really good.
well, this is interesting because I was reading, and if I don't know if you know Edward Flint on Instagram, Rather Ramblings. If you're a
No.
keen gardener, well worth following, wonderful, wonderful posts. And he was talking about not allowing hellebores to self-seed because you just can get overrun with the kind of muddy babies.
Yes.
Rather than, and he's got big clumps of Elizabeth Strangman plants, and you want to
you wouldn't
preserve
want to lose them. I mean, a lot of my hellebores have come from either John Massey or Harvington, and they're wonderful. And at this time of year, I don't do them all at once. When I go down to the woodland garden, I was down there yesterday, and some of the hellebore flowers have lost their stamens, and I just pick them off. They're fading, so I just nip them off with my fingers. So the deadheading isn't done at once. It's done in stages. And then often when you take that flower off, the hellebore will put another flower out. So it's really worth doing it, rather as you would with a rose. It does pay dividends. I don't want thousands of nondescript hellebore seedlings. I've got yellows in certain places with the blue sibirica. I've got double green anemones, I double greens and anemone greens. I want to preserve those. And we struggle with hellebores here anyway, because it doesn't hold much moisture and nutrients, the soil. So we do struggle with them. They don't make great big clumps. I was in Herefordshire and I went to a garden, really sticky clay soil, and they had clumps about 2 feet across. I could have wept. Never mind.
Are you determined to?
He's going to mess your hair up.
Yeah, I mean, it was a mess anyway. Here comes
I think Alan is here.
Here he is.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh.
I deliberately was a little bit late because I knew you two girls have a lot to catch up on.
I was meant to do a radio broadcast yesterday, and I had to be by the phone at 2 or something like that. And nothing happened. And it turned out there was a little man working in the village on the phone lines, and I hadn't got a phone line, but I didn't realise. So I sat there for half an hour.
Slightly tweak your screen so you're slightly more central.
Who? Me?
You.
Am I all right? Have you got enough light on me?
I wasn't trying to be like Val is the star student who is absolutely perfectly aligned in the middle of her screen, and Alan is the naughty one who isn't. But that was exactly how it was.
Alan looked better than me, perfectly aligned or not, because he
Alan
has
would
that.
always look. I mean, no offense, Val, but Al will always look better than almost everybody because it's Alan.
Yes.
Come on.
Just how Alan rolls, isn't it? Looking fabulous all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, shut up.